My name is Alice. For a long time, my value to the company wasn't my strategy, my analysis, or the billion-dollar logistics frameworks I designed. It was my voice. I was the bridge between our world and the world of our partners, the person who could make a complex negotiation feel like a conversation between old friends. But to my boss, Miles, I was something much simpler, a human Google Translate. It's a feeling many of you might know. That feeling of being essential but invisible, the engine that everyone relies on but no one ever bothers to look at. If you've ever felt that way, let me know in the comments. It helps to know I'm not just speaking into the void. Please like this video and subscribe, because today I'm going to tell you how I stopped being a voice and became a foundation. It all came to a head in a glass-walled conference room 40 floors above Tokyo. The air was thick with the polite, unyielding tension that precedes a deal of this magnitude. We were negotiating a partnership with Tanaka Corporation, a titan of Japanese manufacturing, a company whose very name was a synonym for precision and honor. This deal was my baby. I had spent 2 years laying the groundwork, building trust, and designing a logistics network, so intricate and yet so resilient, it was more art than science. For Miles, this was just the glorious final lap. For me, it was the culmination of my life's work. Miles sat at the head of our side of the table, radiating the kind of counterfeit confidence that comes from an expensive suit and a complete ignorance of the stakes. He saw the deference of our hosts not as respect for our company, but as validation of his own brilliance. He would make a point in English, a blunt instrument of a point, and then gesture to me with a flick of his wrist. "Your turn, Alice." And I would take his crude sentences and reforge them, infusing them with the nuance, the respect, the shared understanding of long-term value that our Japanese counterparts required. I wasn't just translating words, I was translating intent, building a bridge over the chasm of his arrogance. He was enjoying himself. Too much. During a short break, while the junior staff refreshed the tea, Miles leaned back in his chair and addressed our small American team in a low, conspiratorial murmur. He thought he was being sly, a man of the world sharing an inside joke. He decided to try out some of his business Japanese, a handful of phrases he'd picked up from a corporate language app. With a smug little smirk, he said, looking at our client, Mr. Tanaka, whose back was turned, that the Tanaka Corporation's deliberation process was like watching an old turtle try to win a race. He used the word gama, kame, turtle, a clumsy, childish insult. He looked at me, expecting a little chuckle. In that moment, something inside me didn't just break. It cooled, it hardened into a perfect, quiet, razor-sharp point. The years of being overlooked, of having my work credited to him, of being called his secret weapon, as if I were a tool he owned, all of it coalesced into a single crystalline thought. He didn't just disrespect our client, he disrespected the bridge I had spent my entire career building. He was a man gleefully throwing rocks at a stained glass window, admiring the noise it made. Mr. Tanaka's aide signaled that the break was over. The room settled. Mr. Tanaka turned back to the table, his expression as serene and unreadable as a deep lake. Miles gestured to me again, that familiar dismissive flick. "Alice, just, he whispered, soften it a little. Tell them we appreciate their thoroughness, but we're eager to move at a more modern pace." I looked directly at Mr. Tanaka. I bowed my head slightly, and I translated. But I didn't use the word for turtle. I didn't soften anything. I took the ugly, careless core of his insult, and I sharpened it. I gave it a formal, deadly precision. I said that my superior, Miles-sama, wished to express his concern. He was worried that our pace was being hindered not by careful deliberation, but by a culture of apathetic negligence. I used the phrase itoreteki na taimon. It doesn't mean slow. It means a deliberate, willful, and therefore deeply insulting neglect of one's duty. It implied that their caution was a mask for laziness, an intentional act of disrespect toward our partnership. It was a poison dart, fired in the most impeccably polite grammar. Silence. Not the tense, negotiating silence from before. This was a different vintage. This was the absolute, profound stillness of a winter forest. The air itself seemed to crystallize. No one on their side of the table gasped. No one scowled. The change was microscopic, but total. An aide's hand reaching for a pen froze midair. Mr. Tanaka's senior advisor, a man who had not moved a muscle for 3 hours, blinked once, very slowly, and Mr. Tanaka himself, he didn't even look at me. He looked at Miles. He held his gaze for a long, silent count of 5. Then he placed his pen down on the polished table. It made a quiet, definitive click, the sound of a door being locked. Miles, oblivious, smiled his predator's smile, thinking his point had been masterfully made. He had no idea that I hadn't just translated his words, I had translated his soul. The meeting was over 10 minutes later. The handshakes were a formality, cold and brief. As we were packing our briefcases, Mr. Tanaka's aide, a young, sharp man named Ito, approached me. He bypassed Miles completely, his eyes fixed only on me. He bowed. "Alice-san," he said in quiet, perfect English. "Tanaka-sama would be most grateful if you would join him for a private conversation tomorrow morning, just you. He wishes to discuss the possibility of a more honorable partnership." I felt the blood drain from Miles's face as he heard the words, "just you." The confusion, the indignation, the sudden hot flare of panic in his eyes as he finally realized he had been cut out of a conversation he thought he was leading. That was the moment the old world ended, and a new one I had just set into motion, was about to begin. The hotel room door clicked shut behind me, the sound echoing in the cavernous silence. For a moment, I just stood there, my hand still on the knob, my briefcase a leaden weight in my other hand. The professional mask I wore, the one forged in 1,000 boardrooms and sealed with 1,000 polite smiles, finally began to crack. There was no dramatic collapse, no flood of tears. It was more of a subsidence, a slow-motion implosion of the woman I had been for the last 10 years. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked out at the sprawling, glittering tapestry of Tokyo, a city built on precision, on honor, on the very principles Miles had just casually desecrated. What had I done? It was a question that pulsed with every beat of my heart. I hadn't just mistranslated, I had committed an act of corporate sabotage. I had taken a critical, multi-billion-dollar negotiation and purposefully aimed it at a cliff's edge. But as I stood there, watching the endless streams of headlights flow like blood cells through the city's arteries, the panic began to recede. It was replaced by something else, a cold, quiet, and deeply unfamiliar sense of calm. It was the calm of a person who has finally, after years of deliberation, pressed the big red button. The outcome was no longer in my hands. The die was cast. The only question left was why. And my mind, unbidden, began to supply the answers in a torrent of memories. It wasn't about a single joke. It was about a decade of 1,000 tiny cuts. My thoughts drifted back to a man named Arthur Vance, the founder of Vance Global Logistics. Arthur wasn't a slick executive. He was an engineer with calloused hands and a belief system that seemed almost quaint in the modern corporate world. He believed in building things, not just supply chains, but relationships. His motto, plastered on the wall of our first real office, was "Build bridges, not walls." He hired me straight out of business school, not for my grasp of financial modeling, but because I was fluent in Japanese and had spent my childhood in Kyoto. He saw my biculturalism not as a party trick, but as a strategic asset. "Alice," he told me once, his eyes twinkling over a cup of cheap coffee, "logistics is easy. It's just moving boxes from A to B. Trust is the hard part. Trust is the only thing that doesn't show up on a balance sheet, but has infinite value." He was my mentor, my champion. He saw me as the heir to his philosophy, the one who would carry the torch of respectful, intelligent global partnership into the future. I wasn't just his employee, I was his legacy project. For 5 years, under his guidance, we built Vance Global into a powerhouse, not by being the cheapest, but by being the most trusted. Our clients weren't just clients, they were partners. We celebrated their successes as our own. We bled with them when things went wrong. It was a special place, a family. Then Arthur had a heart attack on the 17th green of his favorite golf course. He was gone in an instant, and the bridge he had spent his life building began to crumble almost immediately. The board, in its infinite wisdom, replaced the engineer who built things with a financier who sold them off, Miles. He strode into our company culture like a man in muddy boots walking across a white carpet. He saw Arthur's philosophy as a liability, a drain on efficiency. Trust, he once said in a board meeting, with a dismissive wave of his hand, is an unquantifiable metric. Let's focus on the billable hours. He saw our deep client relationships as inefficiencies. He saw me, Arthur's protege, as a relic, a walking, talking embodiment of the old way of doing things. My strategic role was dismantled. I was reassigned to his direct team, my title now Senior Language and Cultural Liaison. It was a demotion disguised as a specialty. I became the human Google Translate. The first major deal under Miles's leadership was with a German automotive conglomerate. It was a logistical nightmare involving 3 different EU tariff zones, 2 languages, and a union dispute. The deal was on the verge of collapse. Miles threw his hands up. He was ready to walk. I spent a week locked in my office, fueled by coffee and a desperate loyalty to Arthur's name on the building. I didn't just solve the tariff problem, I rebuilt the entire supply chain architecture from the ground up, finding a solution so elegant it actually saved the client money and pacified the union. I built the bridge. In the final presentation to the client, Miles presented my entire plan as his own. He stood in front of my slides, my data, my diagrams, and took the credit with a flawless, reptilian smile. My name was never mentioned. In the all-hands email he sent out later, celebrating the hard-won victory, he thanked his team for their support, giving me a special mention for my excellent translation assistance. He got a 7-figure bonus. I got a thanks for the assist. It was the first deep cut. But the true betrayal, the one that laid the groundwork for my actions in Tokyo, centered on my life's work. Over the years, I had refined Arthur's philosophy into a concrete, actionable methodology. It wasn't just about being nice, it was a complex system of risk analysis, cultural integration, and communication protocols designed to forge unbreakable bonds of trust in global business. It was what made our most difficult projects succeed. It was our secret sauce. I called it, in my private notes, the Ishizue Protocol. Ishizue, the foundation stone. It was the core of every success Arthur and I had ever built. Miles knew it was valuable, but he didn't understand it. To him, it wasn't a philosophy, it was a product to be packaged and sold. For the last 2 years, he had been relentlessly pressuring me to document the protocol. He wanted to turn it into a software suite, a series of checklists and automated emails that could be licensed. He wanted to strip it of its humanity, its nuance, its soul. He wanted to put the Vance Global logo on it and his name in the patent filing. He wanted to take the one thing that was truly mine and sell it. I resisted. I gave him surface-level reports. I created bland, corporate-friendly PowerPoint decks that described the what, but never the how or the why. The true Ishizu protocol remained where it had always been, in my head, in my relationships, and in a series of encrypted files on a personal laptop that no one at Vance Global even knew existed. This resistance, this quiet act of intellectual preservation, was my first real act of rebellion. He saw my refusal as stubbornness, as a lack of being a team player. He had no idea I was protecting the crown jewels from a man who only wanted to melt them down for scrap. The final straw came a month before the Japan trip. Miles unveiled his grand new vision for the company, the Momentum Initiative. He presented it to the board in a slick, animated video. It was a grotesquely simplified, bastardized version of my protocol, stripped of all its meaning and filled with corporate buzzwords like synergy, optimization, and paradigm shift. It was the Ishizu protocol lobotomized. And at the end of the presentation, the screen flashed with the title, The Momentum Initiative by Miles Sterling. I sat in the back of the room and I felt nothing. The anger, the hurt, it was all gone. All that was left was a profound, hollow clarity. The company Arthur Vance had built was already a ghost. My loyalty was to a memory, not to this empty shell. I wasn't protecting Arthur's legacy anymore. I was standing guard in a mausoleum. That was the day I stopped trying to save Vance Global and started thinking about how to save myself and my work. Back in the hotel room, my phone buzzed, a secure message. I opened my encrypted laptop, the one Miles didn't know about, and connected to the VPN. The message was from Kenji Tanaka, not a relation to the client, but the son of one of Arthur Vance's oldest friends, and a brilliant young analyst I had taken under my wing. He was the only other person at the company who understood what we had lost, who understood the true meaning of Ishizue. The message contained a single attachment. It was a scanned photo. It was from 15 years ago, at the party celebrating our first big contract. I was standing next to Arthur, both of us grinning, holding up a champagne flute. I looked so young, so full of a belief in the world Arthur was building. The subject line of the email was just 4 words: he would be proud. I looked at the photo, at the hopeful woman I used to be, at the good man who believed in me. And then I looked back out at the Tokyo skyline. The cold calm inside me solidified. It settled deep in my bones. It became resolve. Kenji was right. Arthur would be proud, not of the woman who had silently endured a decade of disrespect, but of the woman who was about to burn it all down to save the one thing that mattered. This wasn't about revenge. I tell myself that, and I believe it. Revenge is a hot, messy, emotional thing. This was cold. This was a strategic demolition. Miles and the board had turned Arthur's beautiful bridge into a toll road, and I was simply rerouting the traffic. The meeting with Tanaka-san wasn't a surrender. It was my first move on a new board, and I knew with absolute certainty that I was ready to play. The night before my meeting with Tanaka-san was not a night of restless anxiety. It was a night of quiet, focused construction. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. Clarity was the only resource that mattered. In the sterile quiet of my hotel room, with the sprawling city lights of Tokyo as my witness, I wasn't just preparing for a meeting. I was building my arc. People like Miles believe that power resides in titles, in corner offices, in the loud pronouncements made in boardrooms. They are wrong. True power, the kind that endures, resides in foresight. It's the quiet preparation done in the shadows, the contingency plans drafted when the sun is shining, the lifeboats built long before the ship ever hits an iceberg. For the past 18 months, ever since Miles had begun his campaign to expropriate my intellectual property, I had been quietly building my lifeboat. My first call was to a man named Samuel Blackwood, a corporate lawyer in Delaware and one of Arthur Vance's oldest and most loyal friends. I had reached out to him after Miles first demanded I document the protocol. Sam was old school, a man who believed a handshake was a sacred text and a contract was a moral document. When I told him what was happening, his voice, usually a warm baritone, had turned to gravel. Arthur didn't build a company, he had said. He built a covenant. And this man, Miles, is trying to break it. On Sam's advice, I had used a portion of my savings I had amassed from years of bonuses that, while smaller than Miles's, were still substantial, to do something proactive. He had helped me form a new entity, a simple LLC registered in Delaware, with a name that meant everything to me and nothing to anyone else. Ishizue Partners. It was a shell, a ghost company with a bank account, a legal framework, and no employees. It was a seed I had planted in the dark, waiting for the right moment of sunlight, or in this case, the right thermonuclear explosion to bloom. The second piece of the puzzle was my employment contract. Sam had spent a week analyzing it. It was a standard Vance Global boilerplate, full of aggressive but surprisingly clumsy language. The non-compete clause was a perfect example of Miles's brand of arrogant carelessness. It was written to prevent employees from jumping to a direct competitor. It explicitly named the big logistics carriers, FedEx, DHL, UPS. It forbade me from working for any company that owned and operated a transportation fleet. It was a fence designed to keep me out of other people's pastures, but it said nothing about starting my own, and it said nothing, absolutely nothing, about working as an independent consultant. Miles, in his hubris, saw me as a functionary he needed to stop from getting a similar job elsewhere. He never once considered that I might build my own table instead of just seeking a new seat at someone else's. It was a loophole wide enough to drive a fleet of trucks through. Sam's email on the matter had been concise. They built the cage, but they forgot to lock the door. The most critical asset, however, wasn't legal or financial. It was the Ishizue protocol itself. My refusal to document it for Miles wasn't just defensive, it was strategic. The protocol wasn't a static document, it was a living system constantly evolving with each new client and each new challenge. It existed in 3 places: in my mind, in the deep trust I had personally cultivated with our clients, and in a series of encrypted modular frameworks on my personal laptop. These frameworks were the keys to the engine. They were the operational blueprints that made the official sterile legal contracts actually work. Vance Global owned the contracts. They had the client signatures on paper, but I, and I alone, had the knowledge of how to turn that paper into a successful, profitable, and stable partnership. The protocol was woven into the very fabric of our most important accounts. It was in the customized risk assessment algorithms I designed for our German automotive partner, the just-in-time inventory system I built for our Brazilian electronics client, and the deeply nuanced communication strategy I had crafted for Tanaka Corporation. Miles had the blueprints to the house, but I was the only one with the keys to the front door, the code to the alarm, and the knowledge of which wall was the load-bearing one. This brought me to my most important ally, Kenji. He wasn't just Arthur's friend's son, he was a brilliant data analyst with a deep sense of loyalty. For the past year, Kenji had been my quiet confederate inside the walls of Vance Global. Under the guise of a global performance analysis project that Miles had approved and promptly forgotten about, Kenji had been helping me build a comprehensive map of my own value. We created a metric we called the Ishizui Index. It was a score assigned to each major client, quantifying their operational dependence on the unwritten, undocumented elements of my protocol. It measured things like the frequency of direct, personal contact between me and the client's key people, the number of custom-built solutions I had implemented, and the degree to which their success relied on processes that existed outside of Vance Global's standard operating procedure. The data was staggering. Over 60% of Vance Global's top-tier revenue was tied to clients with an Ishizu index of 8 or higher on a scale of 10. Tanaka Corporation was a 9.8. We were not just a vendor to them. I was an integrated part of their strategic team. Kenji's data was my ammunition. It proved, in the cold, hard language of numbers that Miles claimed to worship, that I wasn't just an asset to the company. To our most important clients, I was the company. With all these pieces in place, the legal entity, the contractual loophole, the undocumented intellectual property, and the data-driven proof of my own value, I spent the rest of the night not worrying, but working. I opened a fresh document on my secure laptop. I began to draft a proposal for Tanaka-san. It was the most important document I had ever written. It was not a pitch to steal his business from Vance Global. That would be dishonorable, a mirror image of Miles's own craven opportunism. No, my proposal was something far more elegant and far more devastating. I framed it as a solution to the problem that my translation had so brutally exposed, the deep sickness of disrespect rotting the core of his current partner. I offered Ishizu Partners not as a new logistics provider, but as a guarantor of honor, a strategic oversight consultancy. My proposal suggested that Tanaka Corporation invoke a little-known but powerful clause present in most of their major international agreements, the Partnership Integrity Clause. It was a clause I had personally recommended they include years ago, but gave them the right, in circumstances where a partner's conduct or values were called into question, to appoint an independent third-party auditor to oversee the relationship and ensure its integrity. My firm, Ishizue Partners, would be that auditor. I would be paid by Tanaka-san to be the guardian of his interests. I would sit on his side of the table. I would have full access to all communications, all data, all operational plans. I would become the official, contractually mandated layer of management between Tanaka Corporation and Vance Global. In effect, I would become Miles's boss. I wouldn't be stealing his client. I would be taking custody of it. I finished the proposal as the first hints of dawn began to soften the Tokyo sky. It was a simple, 3-page document, clean, precise, and unassailable. I attached the summary of the Ishizue protocol, not the how, but the what and the why. It was a declaration of principle. It was a promise. I saved the document, encrypted it, and sent it to a private email address Ido-san had given me. Then I showered, dressed in my most severe professional suit, and went downstairs to wait for the car that would take me to Tanaka Corporation. I felt a strange lightness. The fear was gone. The anger was a distant echo. All that remained was the quiet, powerful hum of a perfectly designed machine being switched on. I had built my ark. Now it was time to see if it would float. The meeting took place in a room that was the antithesis of the soulless, glass-walled conference room from the day before. It was a small, quiet space on an executive floor of the Tanaka Corporation headquarters. The walls were wood, the lighting was soft, and the only art was a single, perfect piece of calligraphy that I recognized as signifying sincerity. A low black table sat in the center of the room, surrounded by cushions. There was no head of the table. It was a circle. Tanaka-san was already there, kneeling on a cushion. With him was his senior advisor from the previous day, a stern, elderly man named Mr. Nomura. There were no aides, no assistants, just the three of us. As I entered, Tanaka-san gestured to the cushion opposite him. He was dressed not in a suit, but in a simple, dark, traditional garment. The message was clear. This was not a business meeting in the Western sense. This was something more fundamental. I knelt on the cushion, placed my briefcase beside me, and bowed deeply. "Tanaka-sama," I began in Japanese, "I thank you for granting me this audience." He responded in flawless, unaccented English. "Alice-san, please. There is no need for formality between us now. Let us speak plainly." He paused, his eyes, sharp and intelligent, studying my face. "Yesterday, my team was insulted, but you did not insult them. You delivered a message. I understood my colleague Miles's Japanese perfectly well. His words were clumsy. Yours were not. You chose your words as a swordsmith chooses his steel. I would like to know why." The moment of truth. I had rehearsed a dozen different ways to answer this question. Apologize, deflect, explain. But looking at the quiet dignity of the man before me, I knew that only the unvarnished truth would suffice. "Tanaka-sama," I said, my voice steady. My translation was not an apology for Miles's words. It was an indictment of them. His comment was a symptom of a disease that has infected my company, a disease of disrespect, a loss of honor. The company that my mentor, Arthur Vance, built is gone. It has been replaced by a hollow shell that values short-term profit over long-term partnership. What you heard yesterday was not an insult directed at you. It was the death rattle of a philosophy you once trusted. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't let emotion creep in. I delivered the words as a diagnosis, a statement of fact. Nomura-san grunted, a sound of acknowledgement. Tanaka-san remained silent for a long moment, his fingertips resting on the warm ceramic of his teacup. "Arthur Vance," he said, his voice softer now. "He was a good man, an honorable man. We built much together. We trusted him. We trusted his legacy." He looked at me again. "And you believe that legacy is now in peril?" "It is not in peril, sir," I replied. "It is already lost. What remains is a brand name and an infrastructure operated by men who do not understand its purpose. They are trying to turn a relationship into a transaction. That is why I did what I did, to show you in the clearest terms possible that the Vance Global you are in partnership with is not the Vance Global you signed a contract with." It was a gamble, a massive, career-ending gamble. I had just declared my own company corrupt to its most important client. Tanaka-san took a slow sip of tea. He placed the cup down with a quiet click. "I have read your proposal," he said. "Ishizue Partners, the foundation stone, a fitting name." He gestured to Nomura-san, who slid a thin folder across the table toward me. I opened it. It was a single-page document, a letter of intent. It was a contract engaging Ishizue Partners as the exclusive partnership integrity consultant for Tanaka Corporation's entire global logistics network, effective immediately. It granted my new one-person company full oversight authority over their contract with Vance Global. My fee was listed. It was more than my annual salary at Vance. "We cannot simply terminate our agreement with Vance Global," Tanaka-san explained as if lecturing a student. It would be disruptive, messy, it would lack elegance, but our contract, as you yourself shrewdly pointed out in your proposal, gives us the right to ensure the honorable conduct of our partners. From this moment, Alice-san, you will be our guardian, you will be our Ishizue. You will ensure that Vance Global honors the spirit, not just the letter, of the agreement we made with Arthur Vance. Your duty is now to us. A quiet coup. I hadn't stolen the client. The client had just handed me the keys to his kingdom and tasked me with policing my former masters. I bowed my head again, this time with a depth of gratitude that was almost painful. I will not fail you, Tanaka-sama. I know, he said simply. When I returned to the hotel, Miles was pacing in the lobby like a caged wolf. The moment he saw me, he marched over, his face a thundercloud of fury and anxiety. "Where the hell have you been?" he hissed. "I've been calling you for hours. What did you say to him? What did you do?" I didn't break my stride. I simply walked toward the elevator, forcing him to walk backward to keep up. "Mr. Tanaka has decided to move forward with the partnership," I said, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. A wave of relief washed over his face, quickly replaced by smug triumph. "See? I told you. You just have to be firm with these guys. My little joke probably broke the ice. So we're signing tomorrow?" "Not exactly," I said as the elevator doors opened. I stepped inside. Mr. Tanaka was concerned about the cultural disconnect. He has decided to retain a third-party consultant to oversee the project and ensure its smooth execution. Miles scoffed, stepping into the elevator with me. "A consultant? What a waste of money. Some local firm, I assume. We'll just manage them. Standard procedure." The doors closed, encasing us in a small, silent box. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the letter of intent from Tanaka Corporation. It was a copy, but an official one. I handed it to him. He snatched it from my hand. His eyes scanned the first few lines. He saw the Tanaka Corporation letterhead. He saw the words Partnership Integrity. Then he saw the name of the appointed firm, Ishizu Partners. His brow furrowed in confusion. He'd never heard of it. He looked down to the next line, which named the lead consultant and primary point of contact. His eyes widened, the color drained from his face, leaving a pasty grayish pallor. He looked up from the paper, his mouth slightly agape. He stared at me, but he wasn't seeing me, his subordinate. He was seeing a ghost, a problem he could not comprehend. "Ishizu Partners?" he stammered. "Who? What is that?" "That," I said, as the elevator dinged and the doors opened on my floor, "is my company." I took the letter from his trembling hand, stepped out of the elevator, and turned to face him as the doors began to close. His face was a perfect portrait of dawning horror. "From now on, Miles," I said into the closing gap, "you report to me." The doors slid shut, leaving him alone with his panic. The takeover had begun. The fallout was not a storm, it was a quiet, spreading flood. It began in Tokyo, and within 72 hours had inundated the entire global structure of Vance Global. The beauty of my plan was its subtlety. I didn't need to fire a single shot. I simply turned on a light, and the cockroaches that had been thriving in the dark began to scatter. My first 2 days as the head of Ishizu Partners were spent not in an office, but in my hotel room, which had transformed from a cage into a command center. My secure laptop was open, my personal phone buzzing with a new kind of energy. The official communication from Tanaka-san to Vance Global's C-suite had landed like a meteor in their morning meeting in New York. The initial reaction, as relayed to me by Kenji, was confusion, then dismissive arrogance. They assumed it was a power play by Tanaka, a negotiating tactic. Miles, in his initial panicked report, had tried to spin it as me going rogue, a disgruntled employee having a breakdown. The board, for a few hours, believed him. They were already drafting a termination letter for me, and a patronizingly firm response to Tanaka-san. They did not understand the game. They thought it was about one contract. They didn't realize that the foundation stone I had just laid in Tokyo was connected to every other pillar I had built across the world. I sent 2 emails. The first was to Klaus Richter, the head of engineering at our German automotive client. Klaus was a man who valued precision above all else. He and I had spent countless hours on late-night calls, redesigning a supply chain that everyone else said was impossible. Our relationship was built on mutual respect for the craft. My email to him was short and formal. I informed him of my new role with Tanaka Corporation, framing it as a move to ensure strategic alignment and philosophical integrity in our shared global network. I attached a non-proprietary white paper on the principles of the Ishizu Protocol. I did not ask him to do anything. I did not mention Vance Global. I simply informed him of my new position. The second email went to Isabella Rossi, the chief operating officer of our largest client in Brazil. Isabella was a firebrand, a woman who had fought her way to the top and had zero tolerance for incompetence or disrespect. We had bonded over a shared frustration with corporate bureaucracy. My email to her was even simpler. It said, "Isabella, a change has occurred. I am now in a position to guarantee the level of quality we have always discussed. My new contact details are below. Let's talk when you have a moment." I didn't have to wait long. Klaus Richter, being German, was efficient. Within 6 hours, a formal inquiry arrived at Vance Global headquarters from his legal team. It referenced the same partnership integrity